I'm your host, Davina Shinsky, and you're listening to Live Without Limits, Dreams Come True with the Right Mindset. And today's show, we're going to talk about 8 astonishing toxic traits you'll want to put a stop to. And the reason that we're talking about this is so many people end up in toxic relationships just simply because that's the comfort zone they grew up in, and that's the comfort zone they know, and they tend to repeat the same relationships and behaviors. And the only way to change that is to consciously change it by changing your behavior. So no one is perfect. And the truth is, we are all doing the very best we can with what we know. However, constantly learning and evolving is essential for finding satisfaction and contentment with life. Part of this is being able to recognize and overcome your own unhealthy and toxic behavioral patterns. Yes, we've all got them. We might be quick to blame others, or we might judge without thinking. Yet it is possible to change these patterns and become an overall better, kinder, and more emotionally mature person. A lot of it comes down to self awareness, which is exactly what we're learning or leaning into with this show. As Sheryl Sandberg once said, we cannot change what we are not aware of. And once we are aware, we cannot help but change. So get ready to make some waves and start changing yourself. It's time to recognize your own toxic traits and bid them farewell. Can you recognize your own toxic traits? Most of us would like to think that we aren't toxic. We might worry that thinking that we are, in fact, toxic could reduce our self worth and self confidence. The the thing is that many people who exhibit toxic behavior are already have low self-esteem. The problem is that they use those toxic relationships to make themselves feel better. And unless you allow it and keep staying in those relationships, nothing will change. However, recognizing that most people have something they need to work on can help you understand that it's not just you, and that most of us are pushing to be better and do better always. Life tends to come with hurdles and lessons, and there are healthy and unhealthy ways to deal with it. So let's start having more healthy interactions and staking any negative patterns that we tend to do. What is your toxic trait and how can you fix it? Being judgmental. Judgment doesn't serve us or others. In fact, it often creates an unsafe space where your friends and family don't feel heard or respected. And here's the other side: you can't truly judge without being in another person's shoes. There's a lot that you likely don't know. Thus, instead of judging, it's better to try to understand, actively listen. Let the other person know that you hear them and that you care. The other part about judgment is that it tends to reflect our feelings about ourselves. For example, if you're judging another person based on how they dress, you might want to start asking yourself some tough questions. Why does it matter to you how they dress? Are you angry or upset that you wouldn't be able to pull it off? Are you not confident in your own clothes? These questions might be tough, but they are worthwhile to explore. You figure out that it is your own self confidence. You can actively strive to work on it and improve it. Now, what I'm going to say about that is that I can remember being a teenager, and kids and teenagers are always being judgmental of each other and how they dress because they constantly want to fit in and be a part of the in crowd. The problem is that when they're teenagers, they tend to look for the weakest ones that they can take advantage of to make themselves feel better about themselves because somewheres along the way they lack self-confidence. Not apologizing. Do you take responsibility for your actions? Do you express your remorse to others when you have hurt them? Being able to admit when you're wrong is a huge level up in emotional maturity. It's not always someone else's fault. Remember, none of us are perfect. Even in a fight, it takes two to tangle. Admit when you weren't wrong. Or rather, let's put it this way, you need to admit when you are wrong, apologizing for your actions and the part that you played. This is where true growth and change can really start to occur. Now, I grew up with a disability and was educated before you had the Individual Disability Education Act. Therefore, I was the only person with a disability in the school system and in the classroom. And because of that, I was often bullied and teased. But the issue is that 25 years later and 35 years later, I ran into some people that I knew when I was in high school. And do you know they actually apologized to me? One of them had been in the military and had a career in the military. And having done so, he realized just how wrong he was. So realize kids are kids, but they need to learn how to treat other people. And the problem is that all they're doing is mimicking the behavior of what they're seeing their parents do. So it's teaching kids how to get along with each other and how to respect each other. And that often starts by how parents respect each other. Gaslighting. Gaslighting has quickly become a buzzword in the relationship world. Basically, it's a form of emotional abuse where one person's actions and behaviors cause another person to question their thoughts, reality, and memories of certain events. Do you often say, that never happened? Or you have a terrible memory? Or I'm sorry that you think I hurt you. These are all examples of gaslighting. Instead of automatically assuming that the other person is wrong every step of the way, you'll want to again and again listen, hear them out. They are a whole other person with a whole different perspective. And when you listen, you both learn from each other. Here's the thing. When parents have two or three or even four children, sometimes they try to compare the children to each other. And that makes one child feel insecure. And what does they do? Because they feel insecure, they want to go and they go and they hurt other people just simply because it makes them feel as though now they got some power. Passive aggressiveness. Passive aggressiveness is an indirect way of expressing to someone that you weren't happy or that you feel negatively about something. This might mean that you create inconsistencies between what you do and what you say. Some examples include constantly criticizing, procrastinating and forgetting, blaming others, complaining about feeling unrespected, being stubborn. All in all, this probably isn't going to solve the problem, which is causing you to feel upset. In other words, if you tend to be more passive aggressive than not, it's time to start finding more direct and healthy ways to communicate with those that you care about. And this is something that I saw in my mother and that I see in my sister, because this was their constant behavior to constantly criticize the next person. If you ever understand the transactional analysis triangle of the victim, the persecutor, and the rescuer, the persecutor and the rescuer may counter move back and forth, but they keep the other person in the victim mode so that it gives them power. Guilt. Guilt is a form of manipulation. Maybe when you don't get your way in your relationship, you'll try to guilt your partner by proclaiming that they must not love you if they won't do this one thing for you. Often, this creates resentment in a relationship. A better way to do this would be to communicate directly, such as why you want help and how you would feel about that. When a person refuses, you shouldn't continue to push or guilt them into doing something they might not want to do. And this never ends as well. Jealousy. Jealousy comes directly from our own thoughts and feelings about ourselves. Maybe we have low self confidence or we don't feel good about ourselves. Thus, when our partner seems too friendly with other people, we get jealous. However, this usually doesn't serve us. Maybe you make a passive aggressive comment about it. It sets off a huge fight. You can probably see where this is going. Thus, when you feel jealous, try to delve into yourself and your own feelings. How can you feel better? And what is great about you? And how can you appreciate others as opposed to feeling jealous? Stubbornness. Stubbornness is often considered a good thing. For example, many people assume that it makes them look self assured and like they know what they want. Yet, it can also mean that you are hard to compromise or negotiate with, which is essentially in meaningful and long term relationships. You can't always get what you want. If you know that you're guilty of being stubborn, Practice putting other people first, not all the time, but sometimes. Become more flexible. Getting your way isn't the end all and be all, and you know it. Playing the victim. Many people quickly assume that life just happens to them, while in some situations this is somewhat true. It's often not the case. You have more control than you think. At the same time, there are absolutely some cases where a person is the victim, but again, not always. If you play the victim, lash out at others, make others feel guilty about it, and blame others for your feelings, this is your toxic trait. Luckily, you can flip this mentally. Start looking at the things that you can control and begin analyzing how you contribute to your own situation. Then do something about it because you can become the hero of your story as opposed to the victim of your life. Stubbornness. Stubbornness is often considered a good thing. For example, many people assume that it makes them look self assured and like they know what they want. Yet it can also mean that you are hard to compromise or negotiate with, which is essentially in meaningful and long term relationships, you can't always get what you want. If you know that you're guilty of being stubborn, practice putting other people first. Not all the time, but sometimes. Become more flexible. Getting your own way isn't the end all and be all, and you know it. Playing the victim. This is And there is no better time than now to start making changes. Let's take a moment to throw aside the idea that people don't change. They do all the time. Yet, usually, the change must come from within. You have to want it. You have to put in the effort. If any of the toxic traits above sound like you, it's time to start letting them go and working toward being better. You can do this and you can become the person that you've always wanted to be. It all starts with you and what you do. There are no better time than now to start making changes. Let's take a moment to throw aside the idea that people don't change. They do all the time. Yet usually this change must come from within. You have to want it. You have to put in the effort. If any of the toxic traits above sound like you, it's time to start letting them go and working toward being better. You can do this and you can become the person that you've always wanted to be. It all starts with you and what you do. And the last thing that I'm going to say about this is that often, if you have a family where it's a toxic relationship with all members in the family and you change, often you might have to disassociate yourself from that family because they're going to try and pull you right back into doing that toxic behavior. I grew up with a disability in a family that was very toxic. I had a father that physically abused, a mother that emotionally and verbally abused. Their marriage was based on mutual need and not love. And they did not respect their children. And because they had two children with disabilities and there was no respect there, the baby of the family learned that she could abuse her sisters and she could get away with all of it. So remember, if you have a toxic family and you make the change, then make sure you stay as far away from them as you can, because they are not healthy and will not change unless they're forced to on their own.